the reason we changed the order is that my presentation is very vague. I am not a specialist in public catering, but what I'm trying to do is to bring together some perspectives, and that means many of you will already be aware, so I apologize, but maybe there are some things that you are not necessarily aware, and I'm looking forward to learn more from all of you. So in what context are we? I realized yesterday that if I put it big, I had cut most countries, but this is a projection of obesity for 2030. I'm pleased to see that actually Hungary is on the right path, which is surprising, but I would be very worried if I was coming from Ireland or Greece, and not only. So we really have a problem there. This is a model of WHO. So the problem is with diets. So if diets are a problem, diets is also a solution. Why food systems as they are now are failing us? Because they do not deliver healthy diets. Why don't they deliver healthy diets? Well, actually, because they never were designed to deliver healthy diets. That wasn't the idea. So what's wrong with the system right now? The system has been focusing on quantity of staple foods and calories, and has not been looking at the quality of food, and in particular micronutrients. It's been supply-driven. The issue, you produce food and consumers had to eat it, and you were not thinking of a diet, you were thinking, I am in wheat, or I am in oil, or I am in sugar, and my job is to get as much as I can and have it eaten. And then we know that food prices now, we go to supermarkets and the food is cheapest than it's ever been in the history, because the share of our budget at the end of the month we spend on food is fairly low. And everywhere you say this supermarket is doing a discount and it's even cheaper. I mean, these are not real prices, because it does not take into account the environmental cost and the social cost of the food that we purchase. And we know very well that the way the environment is managed now with all this monoculture, high use of chemicals, etc., is not good for the environment. And small farmers are not making a living, and they're abandoning agriculture. So how can we change this? Well, probably one way of changing it is to look at our diets and make sure that they are sustainable. What are sustainable diets? They are diets, of course, that are healthy and safe, but they also have a low environmental impact. They are affordable, equitable, and culturally acceptable. And there is a publication that has been issued following an expert consultation in July 2019 by FAO and WHO on sustainable healthy diets guiding principles. And it does give the state of the art of the thinking in that context. Other publications that have been widely publicized in 2019, this is the report of the Eat Lancet Commission, and the idea is, how do we get a healthy population within a healthy planet? And that is going to mean a lot of changes the way we eat, way less meat and dairy, and more nuts and more micronutrients and less processed foods. So the idea of that report was to provide global scientific targets for healthy diets and sustainable food production. So one of the conclusions of that report is that we should, and by the way I'm presenting reflects my own opinions and not necessarily everybody's opinion, that the most important thing for me is that it's really pushing for going to local diets. And so local diets, and I think I've been increasingly convinced that it's very important to base yourself on traditional diets, indigenous knowledge, and culture. Because when you start thinking, in many places I've been working when I was in FAO, we had subsistence farming. Well, actually, subsistence farming used local products from the local biodiversity. They were low input because people didn't know how to use chemical inputs, and they couldn't afford them anyway. They were risk adverse because it was very difficult when you had a drought or something. It was a matter of life and death that if your maize had dried, well, you needed to make sure you had tubers that would feed your family. Then all these diets were seasonal, and there was a lot of local processing and storage. In Italy, you never used to eat tomatoes in winter. You eat tomatoes in summer fresh, and then you process them, and that you eat in winter. It had limited environmental impact, it was providing jobs to the local people, and it was more affordable locally. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that this was wonderful. And if we look at traditional diets, and I guess maybe the Hungarian traditional diet may be in that way, and Nordic diets were certainly in that condition, you'd better revisit it according to what we know of scientific knowledge of what is a healthy diet. So this is a map of, this was done by the environmentalists in the EU Commission. And interesting enough, it's not cutting us into countries in Europe, but cutting us in biogeographical areas that have a lot of commonalities. And probably it would be good to start thinking of diets in that kind of context. Now, for Hungary, it's not a problem. I think it's about the only country that's all orange. And so you've got your problem of your own you can figure out. But for France, Italy, well, England and Scotland are also in a fairly comfortable position. But for many other countries, we cannot have national diets. We need to start looking much more at what is happening locally. Now, if we're going to have these kind of diets, we need to figure out who consumes those diets, where do these people live? And that's where we start looking at urbanization. And this is a map of urbanization in Europe. And we all know, all of us, I think most all of us, live in cities now. And that's where the consumers are, and that's where the wallet of the consumer is. So they're the ones that have the purchasing power that can help reorient the system. So since all these people live in urban areas, municipalities start to have a real role. And what was really interesting is that, in general, municipalities were looking at buildings, access roads, health centers, schools. They didn't talk of food. They just tried to see if they would leave some land for supermarkets so that they could collect local taxes, but they felt that responsibility of food was with the private sector. And in 2015, well, it started in 2014, the mayor of Milan at that time, and he's changed since, decided that he wanted his city to start thinking of an urban food policy, and he started using his networks in the networks of cities to say, why don't we join forces and start thinking about it all together? And in 2015, there were almost 100 cities that signed the Milan Pact at the end of the Milan Expo. And now there are 209 cities, and that's among those, about 95 cities are European. But regrettably, very little from Eastern and Central Europe. So what, if you go to the text of the Milan Pact, which you will see at the link below, you will see it's all about sustainable diets with special attention to schools, care centers, reorient institutional food services to provide food that is healthy, local, regionally sourced, seasonal, and sustainably produced, promote networks, community school kitchens that create social inclusion and provide food to marginalized individuals, review public procurement policy, therefore using the potential of public procurement to help realize the right to food for all. So a very broad, because public procurement was only part of it, but the idea was to try and get that global framework, and then each city says where I am, and in that, what else could I do, and how could I link with other cities? Shoot, what did I do? Okay, so let me give examples, and you all know those examples, and I apologize to Robin and others. to talk about Copenhagen and Montsartou. Okay, Copenhagen, the idea is how can you use public green procurement to transform food culture. And 89% of the food that is now prepared in the 900 kitchens, public kitchens in Copenhagen, which means daycare centers, nursing homes, and schools, is organic. And it is very much based on a rural-based gastronomy. And it is what was most interesting there. It was within existing budgets. What they did is that kitchen staff usually are chefs, and they are the ones who do everything. That is, they buy, they cook from scratch, they eat less meat, they use seasonal vegetables, they bake, they preserve, they ferment, and they fight food waste. And by doing that, they cut down on the cost. And that has meant restructuring the procurement methods, and that's what many of my more competent colleagues are going to talk about, and support to development of organic supply chain, which other competent colleagues are going to talk about. Another example, so Copenhagen is a big city. Montsartou, which was already introduced, is a smaller city. And I got to know of Montsartou in Budapest. So it is a close circle here. And what's interesting there is you have 3 schools, you have a daycare center, you've got about 1,000 meals a day. And now they are 100% organic. How do they do that? Well, they declassified some of the land that was designated for real estate. And they say, no, we're going to get it back to agriculture. And they hired a municipal farmer, so he is officially on the municipality. And then he has support from other people according to the season, what needs to be done, and that creates jobs. Then they produce 85% of the vegetables they need. They do processing and cold storage. That's what they're starting now. The bread is done with local organic flour by the baker. And the rest of the food procurement, they do it from local organic producers through the normal tender system. They've worked a lot on waste reduction, which allowed them to compensate for the additional cost of food preparation. They give kids cooking classes as part of the extracurricular activities. And what's interesting is that 85% of the parents in that commune have changed their food practices. So, another international process, and this time is UN Habitat, which is the organization looking at urban development. The Urban Habitat in 2016 adopted the new urban agenda. Sorry, I just had the French translation coming. Okay, and this new urban agenda was talking of urban-rural linkages, and as follow-up of this, they decided to work on guiding principles for urban-rural linkages. You have the link there. And part of it was use institutional food services, schools, hospitals, etc., as a lever to increase access to healthy, sustainable diets while providing markets for smallholder producers, and that meant reshaping public food service and procurement regulations to respond to sustainable goals. So, 2 major processes at international level. In conclusion, public procurement has a major potential impact on both the consumers and the markets. Municipality, it's one of the tools municipality have, is this, and they're responsible for the majority of public procurement. So municipalities are key actors. But public procurement works best when it is integrated as part of a comprehensive strategy. And this was an example I pinched from a publication of FAO, which was about schools, so inclusive procurement and value chain. You had to go hand in hand with food, nutrition, education, enabling policy legal and institutional environment, and healthy food environment and school food. So all these things need to go together for any single element to work successfully. Green public catering is good for the environment, it's good for health, it's good for jobs, it's good for culture and society, and it is actually a concrete integrating entry point to revive local economies and for sustainable territorial development. What is really important is political will. Where the cities where this has been successful, like Copenhagen and Sartou, it's because the people that were there decided this had to be done and try and find the way to do it, and then they did it. So that's essential. And then consumer support is absolutely essential, and all of us play a role because we are paying. So what we are paying for, we are having a responsibility. So it's very important to ensure horizontal exchange of information between all of your experiences, and I believe that it's particularly interesting if you're in the same bioregions and have the same kind of raw materials. But it's also very important to ensure convergence with national policies and European policies. And when we started working on the Milan Pact, the people on the Council of Regions told us, you know you are going to fight against the European legislation. You said, yes, we know. That's it. You know, legislation are established for very good reason at certain times. They need to be modified if they don't work. So if we want to have local foods that are healthy and give jobs, we are going to have to talk of local foods. And we're probably going to have to adapt some of the hygiene requirements, which are not really that essential if you are at a local level. And that's about it. Thank you very much. And I'm more than happy to learn more about this and go on working with you on all this. Thank you.